The marriage broker's letter had promised a slender orc woman with a gentle disposition, suitable for a farmer's wife who could help with household tasks and perhaps tend a small garden. Preston Everett stood on the dusty platform of Millbrook Station, nervously adjusting his worn hat as the afternoon train pulled in with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam, and he found himself wondering for the 100th time if he had made a terrible mistake arranging a marriage with someone he had never met. The passengers began to disembark, and Preston watched each one carefully. An elderly human couple, a merchant with 3 large trunks, a family with squalling children. Then he saw her, and his breath caught in his throat for reasons entirely different than he had anticipated. She was an orc, certainly. Her skin was the deep green of summer leaves, and 2 small tusks curved upward from her lower jaw, but slender. The woman who stepped down from the train car was nearly 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the platform. Her arms, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of her travel dress, were corded with muscle that spoke of years of hard labor. She carried a trunk under each arm as though they weighed nothing at all, and when she set them down on the platform, the boards creaked under their weight. Preston felt his mouth go dry. This could not be his bride. This woman looked like she could uproot trees with her bare hands. The broker had sent him the wrong person, surely. But then she looked around the platform, her dark eyes scanning the faces, and when those eyes landed on him, she smiled. It was a hesitant, hopeful smile that softened her strong features, and she raised one massive hand in a tentative wave. "Preston Everett," she called, her voice deep but feminine. He swallowed hard and stepped forward because what else could he do? "Yes, I am Preston." She approached him, and he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. Up close, he could see that, despite her intimidating size, her face was kind. Worry lines creased her brow, and there was something vulnerable in the way she held herself, as though trying to make her large frame smaller. "I am Urzka," she said, and then added quickly, "The broker said you were looking for a wife to help on your farm. I know I am not what you expected. The broker told me he would write that I was strong. He said farmers needed strength." Her voice faltered slightly. "If you do not want me, I understand. I can take the next train back to the border territories." Preston looked at her properly then, really looked. Beyond the shock of her size, he saw the careful way she had braided her dark hair, the clean but well-mended dress she wore, the hope and fear warring in her expression. He saw a woman who had traveled far on the promise of a new life, only to be met by a man staring at her as though she were a monster. Shame heated his face. He thought of his farm, struggling after 3 years of working it alone. He thought of the heavy plow that took him hours to move by himself, of the fields he could not properly tend, because there was simply too much work for one man. He thought of the loneliness that had driven him to contact the marriage broker in the first place. And he thought of how it must feel to be looked at the way he had just looked at her. "No," he said, and when alarm flashed across her face, he quickly added, "I mean, please do not take the next train. I am sorry for staring." "You are right that I was surprised, but farmers do need strength, and I—" He gestured helplessly at himself, at his lean frame and work-worn hands. "I have been managing my farm alone for 3 years, and it has been hard, very hard. If you are willing to help with the heavy work, then I would be grateful to have you." It was not a romantic speech. It was not even a particularly welcoming one, but it was honest, and Urzka seemed to recognize that. "You truly want me to stay?" she asked carefully. "I do," Preston said, and found that he meant it. "My wagon is just over there. Let me help you with your trunks." He reached for one of the trunks and immediately understood why the platform boards had creaked. The thing must have weighed over 100 pounds. He managed to lift it, but Urzka gently took it from his hands. "I can carry them," she said quietly. "It is no trouble." She picked up both trunks, one under each arm, and followed him to the wagon. Preston tried not to feel emasculated by the ease with which she handled loads that would have strained him. Instead, he focused on helping her secure the trunks in the wagon bed, and then offering her a hand up to the seat. She stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, as though unused to such courtesies, before taking it carefully. Her hand engulfed his, and he could feel the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip that she was clearly moderating so as not to hurt him. The wagon ride to his farm took nearly an hour, and for the first half of it, neither of them spoke. Preston guided the horses along the rutted road while Urzka sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes taking in the rolling farmland around them. Finally, Preston could not stand the silence anymore. "The broker told me you were from the border territories," he said. "What made you want to come south?" Urzka was quiet for a long moment. "There is not much opportunity for orc women where I am from," she said eventually. "The clans follow the old ways. Women are expected to marry warriors, bear children, and keep to the camps. I am strong, but I am not." She paused, searching for words. "I am not suited to clan life. I do not want to spend my days tanning hides and cooking for a husband who values me only for sons. I wanted something different. The broker said that human farmers sometimes needed wives who could work, not just ornament a home. He said there were men who valued strength and partnership." "And you did not mind that these men would be human?" Preston asked carefully. "I did not," Urzka said. "My clan exiled me when I told them I was leaving to answer the broker's advertisement. They said I was a traitor to orc kind, that I was degrading myself by offering to be a servant to humans." Her voice hardened. "But I would rather be a partner to someone who respects me than property to someone who does not." Preston absorbed this. "I cannot promise to be a perfect husband," he said slowly. "I have never been married before. I do not know what I am doing. But I can promise that I will not treat you as property. You will be a partner here, an equal." Urzka turned to look at him, and there was something searching in her gaze. "Why did you contact the broker?" she asked. "A human farmer could find a human wife easily enough, I would think." Preston felt heat creep up his neck. "The truth is that I tried," he admitted. "But I am not from Millbrook originally. I came here 3 years ago with a land grant from my military service. The local families do not know me, and they do not trust outsiders easily. The few women I approached made it clear they were not interested in a poor farmer with more debts than crops." He shrugged. "The broker's fee was expensive, but it seemed like my best option. I need help with the farm, and I need a wife. I thought perhaps an arrangement would work better than trying to court someone who did not want me anyway. So we are both outcasts seeking a place to belong," Urzka said softly. "I suppose we are," Preston agreed. They fell into silence again, but this time it felt more comfortable. By the time Preston's farm came into view, the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The farm was not impressive. A small wooden house, a barn that needed repairs, fields that showed evidence of hard work but limited success. Preston saw it through Urzka's eyes and felt a wave of inadequacy. "It is not much," he said as he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "But it is mine. Well, it will be fully mine once I finish paying off the land grant. For now, it is ours if you are willing." Urzka climbed down from the wagon and looked around. Her eyes took in the sagging barn door, the field with rows of struggling crops, the chicken coop that desperately needed reinforcement. But when she turned back to Preston, she was smiling. "I have never had anything that was mine before," she said. "Ours sounds wonderful." Preston felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. He helped Urzka carry her trunks into the house. Though helped was perhaps generous given that she did most of the actual carrying. Inside, the house was clean but sparse. A main room with a fireplace and a simple kitchen area. 2 small bedrooms, a loft space for storage. "I have been using the larger bedroom," Preston said, gesturing to the room on the right. "But you should take it. I can move to the smaller one." "We are married, are we not?" Urzka asked, and Preston felt his face flush. "Legally, yes. The broker arranged the paperwork, but I thought. That is, I assumed you would want your own space, until you were comfortable. If you ever wanted to share a room, I mean." He was making a mess of this, and he knew it. Urzka's expression softened. "That is kind of you," she said gently. "I will take the larger room for now if you do not mind, but I appreciate you thinking of my comfort." They spent the rest of the evening in careful politeness. Preston made a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and preserved vegetables, apologizing for the humble fare. Urzka ate heartily and complimented the bread, which Preston had baked himself. They spoke of small things: the farm's layout, the daily routines, the nearby town of Millbrook and its weekly market. As darkness fell, they retired to their separate rooms. Preston lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his house. He wondered what Urzka was thinking, whether she regretted coming, whether this awkward arrangement could ever become something real. Preston woke before dawn, as he always did. He dressed quietly and went outside to begin the morning chores. The chickens needed feeding, the cow needed milking, and he wanted to get an early start on trying to repair the barn door before the day grew too hot. He was surprised to find Urzka already outside, examining the barn with a critical eye. She had changed from her travel dress into work clothes, a simple tunic and trousers that accommodated her muscular frame. "You are up early," Preston said, walking over to join her. "I am used to early mornings," Urzka replied. "The barn needs work." "I know," Preston sighed. "The hinges are rusted through and the door keeps falling off. I have tried to fix it 3 times, but I cannot seem to get it to sit properly." Urzka circled the barn, running her hands along the frame. "The problem is not the hinges," she said after a moment. "The frame is warped. You need to reinforce it before you can hang the door properly." "I am not much of a carpenter," Preston admitted. "I can plow and plant well enough, but building has never been my strength." "I can do it," Urzka said. "In the clan camps, we had to maintain our own structures. I learned how to work with wood and repair buildings. If you have tools and lumber, I can fix this." Preston felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Relief because the barn desperately needed repair, and he had been at a loss for how to manage it. Embarrassment because his new wife was offering to do work that he, as a man, felt he should be able to handle himself. Urzka seemed to sense his discomfort. "You have skills I do not have," she said quietly. "You know this land, the crops, the animals. I know building and heavy labor. Together we can do more than either of us could alone. That is what a partnership means, is it not?" She was right, Preston knew. He nodded. "The tools are in the shed and there is some lumber stacked behind the barn. Use whatever you need." "What will you do today?" Urzka asked. "I need to check the fields and see what can be salvaged from the last planting," Preston said. "Then I should go into town for supplies. We are running low on flour and oats, and I need to pick up a few things from the blacksmith. Would you like to come with me? I could introduce you to some of the townspeople." Urzka hesitated. "Perhaps it would be better if I stayed here today," she said carefully. "I should start on the barn, and besides, it might be easier for people to accept me if they hear about me from you first, rather than seeing me suddenly appear." Preston understood what she was not saying. She expected prejudice, fear, perhaps even hostility, and she was probably right to expect it. Millbrook was a small town, and while there were a few orc laborers who worked the lumber camps to the north, an orc woman married to a human farmer would be unusual enough to cause talk. "All right," Preston agreed. "But I will tell anyone who asks that you are my wife, and that I am glad to have you here." Urzka smiled, and Preston found himself thinking that her smile transformed her entire face. "Thank you," she said softly. Preston spent the morning in the fields, assessing the damage from a late frost that had killed off nearly a third of his wheat crop. It was discouraging work, but he tried to stay focused on what could be saved rather than what was lost. From the fields, he could hear the sound of Urzka working on the barn, the rasp of a saw, the thud of a hammer, her occasional grunt of effort. When he returned to the farmyard around midday, he stopped and stared. Urzka had not only repaired the barn door frame, she had reinforced the entire front wall of the barn. New support beams had been added, and the door now hung straight and true on new hinges she must have fashioned from scrap metal. "How did you do all this in a few hours?" Preston asked, amazed. Urzka wiped sweat from her brow. "It needed doing," she said simply. "I can finish the rest of the barn over the next few days if you want. The roof needs patching and some of the floorboards are rotten." "Urzka, this would have taken me weeks," Preston said. "You did it in a morning." She looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I am strong," she said. "It is the one thing I am good at. I might as well use it." Preston wanted to tell her that strength was not the only thing she had to offer, but he did not know her well enough yet to say such things without it seeming strange. Instead, he said, "Let me make us some lunch, and then I will head into town. Is there anything you need?" They ate together in the shade of the house, simple sandwiches that Preston threw together from yesterday's bread and some salted pork. Urzka gave him a list of supplies she would need for continuing the barn repairs, and Preston added them to his own mental list. The ride into Millbrook took about 30 minutes. It was a pleasant town, small but tidy, with a main street that boasted a general store, a blacksmith, a church, and a tavern. Preston tied his wagon outside the general store and went inside. Martha Flynn, the store owner, greeted him with a warm smile. "Preston, good to see you." "The usual supplies." "Yes, and a few other things," Preston said, handing her his list. As Martha gathered the items, she chatted about town gossip. Who was courting whom, what the harvest predictions were, the new preacher who would be arriving next month. Preston listened with half an ear, waiting for the right moment. "Oh, I heard the strangest rumor," Martha said as she wrapped up a block of cheese. "Someone said they saw you at the train station yesterday with an orc woman. I told them they must have been mistaken, but—" "It was not a mistake," Preston said calmly. "Her name is Urzka. She is my wife. She arrived yesterday from the border territories." Martha's hand stilled. "Your wife," she repeated. "Yes. We were married by proxy through a marriage broker. She came to help me with the farm." Martha set down the cheese very carefully. "Preston, I do not mean to pry into your business, but an orc, people are not going to take kindly to that. You know how folks are." "I know how they are," Preston said evenly. "But Urzka is my wife, and I will thank people to treat her with respect." "I am not saying I have a problem with it," Martha said quickly. "But you should prepare yourself for talk, and maybe keep her away from town for a while until people get used to the idea." Preston felt anger kindle in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Urzka has as much right to come to town as anyone else. When she is ready, she will come, and I expect people to be civil." Martha raised her hands in a placating gesture. All right. I am just trying to warn you is all. People can be narrow-minded." Preston paid for his supplies and left, but not before stopping at the blacksmith to pick up the tools Urzka needed. The blacksmith, a burly man named Thomas, gave Preston a strange look when he asked for heavy-duty files and metal stock. "Taking on some big project?" Thomas asked. "My wife is repairing the barn," Preston said, testing the words in his mouth. "My wife." "Your wife," Thomas frowned. "I did not know you had married. Just yesterday. She arrived on the afternoon train." Thomas's frown deepened, and Preston could see the man putting pieces together. "I heard about that," he said slowly. "Heard you married an orc." "I did." "That is going to cause you problems, Preston." "Maybe," Preston said, "but that is my concern, not anyone else's." He paid for the tools and left before Thomas could say anything else. By the time he returned to the farm, his anger had cooled into something more like determination. People would talk, yes. They might shun him, might make his life difficult. But he had made a commitment to Urzka, and he would not abandon her because his neighbors were small-minded. Urzka was working on the barn roof when he returned, balanced on a ladder that looked far too flimsy to support her weight. Preston's heart jumped into his throat. "Be careful up there," he called. She looked down and grinned. "I am always careful." Preston unloaded the supplies and brought the tools out to her. As she examined the metal stock, her eyes lit up. "This is perfect, thank you." "The blacksmith asked about you," Preston said. "Word is already spreading around town." Urzka's smile faded. "What are people saying?" "That I am a fool for marrying an orc," Preston said bluntly. "That it will cause me problems." "They are probably right," Urzka said quietly. She climbed down from the ladder. "Preston, if this is going to make your life harder, I can leave. I do not want to ruin things for you here." "You are not ruining anything," Preston said firmly. "I knew people would talk when I contacted the broker. I made my choice. I am not going to let gossip change that." Urzka looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. "You are kinder than I expected," she said softly. "Most humans would not defend an orc, especially not one they barely know." "We may not know each other well yet," Preston said, "but you are my wife. That means something to me. I hope it will come to mean something to both of us in time." A faint blush darkened Urzka's green cheeks. "I hope so too," she said. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Preston managed the crops and animals while Urzka worked on the farm buildings. She repaired the barn completely, then moved on to fixing the chicken coop and reinforcing the fence around the vegetable garden. Preston had never seen anyone work with such focus and endurance. Urzka could labor from dawn until dusk without seeming to tire, lifting and carrying loads that would have required 2 or 3 men. But it was not just her strength that impressed him. She was clever with her hands, able to solve problems that had stymied Preston for months. When the well started producing muddy water, she figured out that the problem was a crack in the lining and knew how to seal it. When the plow kept catching on rocks, she modified the blade to cut at a better angle. In the evenings, they would eat dinner together and talk. Urzka told him about life in the orc clans, the constant moving from place to place, the rigid hierarchies, the pressure to conform to tradition. Preston told her about his time in the army, about the friends he had lost in a border skirmish, about how the land grant had seemed like a chance to start over, but had turned out to be harder than he expected. They were learning each other, slowly, in the way of 2 strangers trying to build something from nothing. At the end of the first week, Preston woke to find Urzka already in the kitchen, making breakfast. She had gotten up early to bake bread, and the smell filled the house. "You did not have to do that," Preston said, though his mouth watered at the scent. "I wanted to," Urzka said. "You have been cooking every night. It seemed only fair that I take a turn." They sat down to eat together, and Preston bit into the bread. It was dense and hearty, with a slightly nutty flavor he could not quite place. "This is delicious," he said honestly. "What is in it?" It is a recipe from my clan, Urzka said. I ground some acorns I found near the creek and mixed them with the flour. It makes the bread more filling. You should make this for the market, Preston said. I bet people would buy it. Urzka looked doubtful. You think anyone would buy bread made by an orc? I think anyone would buy bread that tastes this good, Preston said. And anyway, market day is tomorrow. Why do not you come with me? It is time people met you properly. Urzka bit her lip, a gesture that looked oddly delicate given her tusks. I do not know. I will be with you the whole time, Preston promised, and if anyone is rude, we will leave. But I think you should come. This is your home now, too. You should not have to hide. Urzka took a deep breath and nodded. All right. I will come. The next morning they loaded the wagon with produce. Preston hoped to sell carrots, turnips, some early lettuce, and a dozen loaves of Urzka's bread. The ride into town was quiet, and Preston could feel Urzka's tension radiating off her in waves. It will be all right, he said, though he was not entirely sure he believed it. The market was held in the town square every Saturday. By the time they arrived, it was already bustling with people. Preston found an empty spot and began setting up their stall. He was aware of people stopping to stare, of conversations cutting off as they passed, of the whispers that followed them. Urzka kept her head high, but Preston could see the way her jaw tightened, the way her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. Just ignore them, he murmured. They set out their goods, and for a while no one approached. People walked by, looked at their produce, and then hurried on. Preston felt his own anger building. The vegetables were good quality, better than what some of the other farmers were selling, but no one would even give them a chance. Then a woman approached. She was elderly, with kind eyes and a cane. "Are those carrots fresh?" she asked Preston. "Pulled them yesterday, madam," Preston said. "And who is this?" the woman asked, looking at Urzka. "This is my wife, Urzka," Preston said. The woman looked Urzka up and down without fear or malice, just curiosity. "You are a tall one, are you not?" she said. "I am Edith. I live just outside town on the old Brennan property." "It is nice to meet you," Urzka said quietly. "What is that bread?" Edith asked, pointing to the loaves. "I made it," Urzka said. "It has acorn flour mixed in." "Acorn flour? I have not had that since I was a girl. My grandmother used to make bread like that." Edith picked up a loaf and examined it. "I will take 2 loaves and a bunch of carrots." "Thank you," Urzka said, and Preston could hear the relief in her voice. As Edith paid and moved on, others began to approach. Some were clearly just curious, wanting to get a closer look at the orc woman who had married Preston Everett. But others genuinely wanted to buy produce, and several people asked about the bread. Not everyone was kind. A man named Richard, who owned the farm neighboring Preston's, stopped by the stall and sneered openly. "I heard you brought home a monster, Everett," he said loudly enough for people nearby to hear. "Did not believe it until I saw it with my own eyes." Preston stepped forward, but Urzka put a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. "I am no monster," she said calmly, looking Richard in the eye. "I am just a woman trying to make a life with her husband. If that offends you, I am sorry, but it changes nothing." Richard looked taken aback by her directness. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then stomped off without another word. "That was well said," Preston told Urzka. "I have dealt with worse," Urzka said quietly. "At least he did not try to spit on me." Preston felt a surge of anger at the thought that anyone had ever treated her so badly. But before he could say anything, another customer approached. By the end of the market day, they had sold all the produce and most of the bread. It was not a fortune, but it was more than Preston usually made, and people had been talking about Urzka's bread. Several asked if she would have more next week. On the ride home, Urzka was quiet, staring out at the passing fields. "You did well today," Preston said. People liked your bread. Some people liked it, Urzka corrected. Others looked at me like I was going to eat their children. Some people are idiots, Preston said bluntly. But we made a good amount of money, and next week we will make more. People will get used to you. Maybe, Urzka said. She turned to look at him. Thank you for standing with me today. I know it would be easier for you if I stayed hidden at the farm. Easier is not always better, Preston said. Besides, I meant what I said. You are my wife. We stand together. Something in Urzka's expression softened, and she reached over and took his hand. Her hand was so much larger than his, engulfing his completely, but her grip was gentle. They rode the rest of the way home hand in hand. Spring turned into early summer, and the farm began to thrive in ways Preston had never managed on his own. With Urzka handling the heavy labor and repairs, Preston could focus on the more delicate work of tending crops and managing the animals. The fields looked better than they ever had. The buildings were all in good repair, and they had started making a regular profit at the market. But more than the farm's success, Preston found himself noticing the small ways in which Urzka was becoming part of his life. The way she hummed while she worked, a wordless tune that Preston found himself listening for. The way she would leave little surprises for him, a repaired tool, a patch on his favorite shirt, a special dinner when she knew he had had a hard day. He tried to reciprocate in his own ways. He brought her wildflowers from the fields. He made sure to thank her for her work, to notice the things she did. He started teaching her to read and write in the evenings, because she had mentioned once that clan orcs were not usually educated, and she had always wanted to learn. They were building something, Preston realized. Not just a working partnership, but a real relationship. And somewhere along the way, his feelings had shifted from gratitude and respect to something deeper. He did not know when exactly he had fallen in love with his wife, but he knew that he had. The problem was that he did not know if she felt the same way. They still slept in separate rooms. They were affectionate in small ways, a hand on the shoulder, a shared smile, but there was still a distance between them, a reserve that neither seemed willing to cross. Preston wondered if it was because she did not see him that way. He was smaller than her, weaker, less impressive. Maybe she saw him as a kind employer or a friend, but not as a true husband. The thought pained him more than he wanted to admit. One evening in late June, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Preston gathered his courage. "Urzka," he said carefully. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, turning to look at him. "Are you happy here?" he asked. "Truly happy?" Urzka tilted her head, considering. "Yes," she said. "I am happier than I have ever been. Why do you ask?" "I just want to make sure," Preston said. "I know this was not a conventional marriage. We barely knew each other when you arrived, and I know I am not. That is, I am aware that I am not what most women would want in a husband. I am not strong or impressive, and the farm is still struggling, and Preston," Urzka interrupted gently. "Stop." He fell silent, his heart pounding. "You think you are not what I want in a husband?" Urzka asked, her voice soft. "Preston, you are kind and honest, and you have treated me with more respect than any man ever has. You stood up for me in town when it would have been easier to pretend I did not exist. You teach me to read in the evenings even though you are exhausted from working all day. You bring me flowers just because you know I like them." She reached out and took his hand. "I do not care that you are not as strong as an orc warrior. Strength is not what makes a good husband. Character is." Preston felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I care about you," he said, the words tumbling out. "More than I thought I would. More than I probably should after only a few months. I know we agreed this was a practical arrangement, but I want it to be more than that. I want us to be a real marriage." "Preston," Urzka whispered, and there were tears shining in her eyes. "I want that too. I have wanted it for weeks, but I did not know if you felt the same. I thought maybe you were just being kind, that you saw me as a worker rather than a wife." "Never," Preston said fiercely. "Urzka, you are my wife in every way that matters to me. I just did not want to presume. I wanted you to have a choice." "I choose you," Urzka said. "I choose this life, this farm, this marriage. I choose us." Preston leaned in and Urzka met him halfway. Their kiss was awkward at first, complicated by the difference in their heights and the unfamiliarity of it all. But then Urzka cupped Preston's face in her hands, so gentle despite her strength, and Preston wrapped his arms around her as much as he could, and the kiss deepened into something real and right. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I should move into your room," Preston said. "If you want me to." "I want you to," Urzka said. "I have wanted you to for a while now." They went inside together, and that night they became husband and wife in truth as well as name. It was tender and sweet, both of them nervous but eager, learning each other in this new way. Urzka was careful with Preston, always aware of her strength, but Preston showed her that he was not fragile, that he wanted her just as she was. Afterward, they lay tangled together in bed, and Preston felt a completeness he had not known he was missing. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I love you too," Urzka whispered back, and Preston felt her arms tighten around him. The summer passed in a haze of hard work and growing love. Preston and Urzka worked the farm together during the day and fell into bed together at night, exhausted but happy. The people of Millbrook slowly grew accustomed to seeing Urzka at market, and while there were still those who treated her coldly, more and more people began to accept her. Edith, the elderly woman who had been one of their first customers, became a particular friend. She would stop by the farm sometimes, bringing seeds or cuttings from her own garden, and would sit and chat with Urzka while Preston worked. "You are good for him," Edith told Urzka one day. "Preston was so lonely before you came. I can see the difference in him now. He is happy." "He is good for me too," Urzka said. "I did not know what happiness was until I came here, but not everyone was so accepting. Richard, the neighboring farmer, continued to be hostile. He would make snide comments whenever he saw them in town, and once Preston caught him trying to sabotage their fence line, letting some of Preston's cattle wander onto his property so he could claim them as strays. Preston confronted him, and they had a heated argument that nearly came to blows. Urzka had to physically step between them, and the sight of her towering over both men was enough to make Richard back down. "You should watch yourself, Everett," Richard spat. "Lying with monsters is going to get you trouble one day." "Urzka is not a monster," Preston said coldly. "And if you ever come near my property again, I will report you to the sheriff." Richard left, but the incident left Preston uneasy. He knew Richard was not just going to let things go. The man was petty and mean-spirited, and he had influence in town that Preston did not. His worries proved founded a few weeks later when the sheriff showed up at the farm. "Preston," Sheriff Donnelly said, tipping his hat, "I need to have a word with you and your wife." "What is this about?" Preston asked, his stomach sinking. "There have been complaints," the sheriff said. "Some people in town are saying that having an orc living here is dangerous. They are worried about safety, about property values, that sort of thing." "That is ridiculous," Preston said. "Urzka has not done anything wrong. She has been nothing but a model citizen." "I am not saying I agree with them," the sheriff said, raising his hands. "But I have to investigate complaints when they are made. Can I speak with Urzka?" Urzka came out of the barn, wiping her hands on a rag. "You wanted to see me, Sheriff, madam," the sheriff said. "I am going to be direct with you. There are people in town who want you gone. They are saying you are a threat, that you might hurt someone." "I would never hurt anyone," Urzka said, her voice steady, but Preston could see the hurt in her eyes. I have done nothing but work on this farm and try to be a good neighbor." "I believe you," the sheriff said. "But I need you to understand that if there is any incident, any reason for people to feel their concerns are justified, I will have to step in. I do not want to, but I have to think about the safety of the whole town." "Are you saying that if someone provokes her, she will be blamed?" Preston demanded. "That is not justice." "I am saying that she needs to be extra careful," the sheriff said. "More careful than a human would have to be. It is not fair, but it is the reality. You both need to keep your heads down and not give people any reason to cause trouble." After the sheriff left, Urzka was quiet. She went back to work in the barn, but Preston could see the slump in her shoulders, the way she moved without her usual energy. That night, she barely touched her dinner. "Talk to me," Preston said gently. "I am ruining your life," Urzka said flatly. "You heard the sheriff. People want me gone. They think I am dangerous. How long before they decide to do something about it? How long before they drive you out of town along with me?" "That is not going to happen," Preston said. "You do not know that." Urzka's voice rose. "Preston, I love you. I love this life we have built, but I cannot stand the thought that I am destroying everything you have worked for. Maybe it would be better if I left, if I went back to the border territories. You could tell people we separated and then—" "No," Preston said sharply. "Absolutely not. Urzka, you are my wife. I love you. I am not going to let small-minded people drive you away." "But what if they hurt you because of me?" Urzka asked, and there were tears streaming down her face now. "What if Richard or someone like him decides to burn down the farm or worse? I could not live with myself if you were hurt because of me." Preston stood and pulled Urzka into his arms. She resisted at first, but then she crumpled against him, her large frame shaking with sobs. "Listen to me," Preston said fiercely. "I knew there would be challenges when I married you. I knew people would talk, that some would be cruel. But I chose you anyway, and I would make that choice again every single day. You are not ruining my life. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." "I am so afraid," Urzka whispered. "I have never been this happy, and I am afraid it is all going to be taken away." "I am afraid too," Preston admitted, "but we will face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." They held each other for a long time, and eventually Urzka's tears subsided. They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, and Preston lay awake long after Urzka had fallen asleep, his mind racing with worry. He needed to find a way to protect her, to protect what they had built. But how did you fight prejudice? How did you change people's minds? The answer came from an unexpected source. A week later, a traveling merchant came through Millbrook. He set up a colorful tent in the town square and began selling exotic goods, spices, fabrics, jewelry. Preston and Urzka went into town for their weekly market day, and the merchant immediately took notice of Urzka. "Magnificent," the merchant exclaimed, approaching their stall. He was a flamboyant man with a huge mustache and clothes that were far too fancy for a farming town. "Madam, you are absolutely magnificent. I have traveled from the Eastern Kingdoms to the Western Isles, and I have never seen such a specimen of health and strength." Urzka looked bewildered. "Thank you," she said uncertainly. "Tell me," the merchant said, "how much can you lift? I saw you unloading crates from your wagon earlier, and you were handling them like they were full of feathers rather than vegetables." "I do not know exactly," Urzka said. "I have never measured. We must test this," the merchant declared. He turned to the small crowd that had gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen, I propose a friendly competition. I have here a set of strongman stones. You may have seen them at fairs and festivals. I will wager 50 silver coins that this fine lady can lift the largest stone that has defeated every man who has tried." A murmur went through the crowd. 50 silver coins was a significant amount of money. I do not know if that is a good idea, Preston said quietly to Urzka, but Urzka was looking at the crowd, at the mixture of curiosity and doubt on their faces. I will do it, she said. The merchant beamed and led them to his tent, where he had a series of large, smooth stones arranged by size. The largest was enormous, easily 300 pounds of solid rock. The rules are simple, the merchant announced to the growing crowd. Lift the stone from the ground to your shoulders. Hold it for a count of 3. Anyone who can do it wins the prize. Several men stepped forward to try, including Richard. One by one, they failed. Some could not even get the stone off the ground. Richard managed to lift it a few inches before dropping it with a grunt of pain. Then it was Urzka's turn. She approached the stone calmly, rolling her shoulders to loosen them. She bent down, got her arms around the stone, and with a smooth, controlled motion, lifted it from the ground. The crowd gasped as she raised it to her shoulders, holding it there steadily while the merchant counted. 1, 2, 3, we have a winner. Urzka set the stone down gently and turned to face the crowd. There was shocked silence, and then someone started clapping. Others joined in, and soon the whole crowd was applauding. The merchant presented Urzka with 50 silver coins, making a grand show of it. My friends, he announced, you are fortunate to have such a marvel in your town. This woman is stronger than any man I have seen in all my travels. You should be proud to call her a neighbor. Preston saw the way people were looking at Urzka now, not with fear or suspicion, but with amazement and a grudging respect. Even Richard looked impressed, though he tried to hide it. As they packed up their stall at the end of the day, several people approached to congratulate Urzka and to ask about her bread, which had sold out within an hour. On the ride home, Urzka was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. She kept touching the pouch of coins as though to make sure they were real. That was something, Preston said with a grin. I have never been applauded before, Urzka said softly. I have been feared, hated, scorned, but never applauded, never praised. You are incredible, Preston said. You are incredible. Urzka turned to him, and there was wonder in her eyes. Do you think it will make a difference? Do you think people will treat me differently now? I think it is a start, Preston said. The merchant was right. People should be proud to have you as a neighbor. Maybe now they will start to see that. Over the following weeks, attitudes in town did begin to shift. People who had avoided their stall started buying from them. Urzka's bread became famous, and she could not bake enough to meet demand. The story of her lifting the stone spread, growing more exaggerated with each telling. More importantly, when harvest time came, several of the neighboring farmers asked if they could hire Urzka to help with their heaviest work. Preston was wary at first, remembering how these same people had shunned them, but Urzka pointed out that it was a chance to earn extra money and to show people she was not a threat. She spent several weeks going from farm to farm, helping to bring in the harvest. She could do the work of 3 men, and she did it with good humor and efficiency. The farmers who hired her came away impressed not just by her strength but by her character. Richard was one of the last holdouts. His harvest was struggling because he had tried to manage it alone and had fallen behind. Finally, swallowing his pride, he came to Preston and Urzka's farm. I need help, he said stiffly, not quite meeting Urzka's eyes. My harvest is going to rot in the fields if I do not get it in soon. I will pay your rate. Urzka looked at Preston, who shrugged. The decision was hers. I will help you, Urzka said, but I have one condition. What is that? Richard asked warily. You apologize to my husband for the things you have said, and you stop spreading lies about me. Richard's jaw worked. For a moment Preston thought he would refuse, but then he turned to Preston and said grudgingly, I am sorry for the things I said. I was wrong about your wife. She is a good worker and I should not have judged her. It was not the most gracious apology, but it was sincere enough. Apology accepted, Preston said. Urzka spent 3 days helping Richard bring in his harvest, and when she was done, he paid her and actually thanked her. You saved my farm, he admitted. I would have lost everything without your help. You are welcome, Urzka said simply. As autumn turned to winter, Preston and Urzka settled into a comfortable rhythm. The farm was doing better than ever, and they had saved enough money to start making improvements: a new plow, better seeds for next year's planting, a cow to add to their small herd. But more than the material success, Preston treasured the life they had built together. The quiet mornings working side by side, the evenings spent reading by the fire, Urzka's reading improving every day, the nights wrapped in each other's arms, warm and safe. One evening in December, as snow began to fall outside, Urzka told Preston she was pregnant. Preston stared at her, his mind going blank with shock and joy. Are you sure? He finally managed. I am sure, Urzka said, and she was smiling through tears. I have been sick in the mornings and my cycle has stopped. Preston, we are going to have a baby. Preston pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. We are going to have a baby, he repeated, as though saying it would make it more real. Are you happy? Urzka asked. Happy, Urzka, I am. I do not have words. I am terrified and excited and so happy I could burst. They talked late into the night about the future, what they would need for the baby, whether it would be more human or more orc or somewhere in between, what they would name it. I want our child to know both sides of their heritage, Urzka said, human and orc. I want them to be proud of what they are. They will be, Preston promised. We will make sure of it. The pregnancy was not easy. Urzka suffered from terrible morning sickness for months, and as she grew larger, her usually endless energy began to flag. Preston took over more of the heavy work, though Urzka chafed at being unable to do her usual labor. I am supposed to be the strong one, she complained one day, frustrated at having to sit down after only an hour of work. You are growing a whole person inside you, Preston said. That is the hardest work there is. Let me handle the rest. The people of Millbrook rallied around them in ways Preston had not expected. Martha from the general store brought baby clothes. Edith came by regularly with food and advice. Even some of the farmers who had been hostile before stopped by to offer congratulations. It seems people are more accepting when they realize you are staying, Edith observed one day. They have gotten used to you being part of the community. It only took proving I was useful, Urzka said with a wry smile. That is how it works for everyone, Edith said gently. Human or orc, you have to prove yourself before people accept you. The difference is that you had to work harder to prove it, but you did, and now you are one of us. Urzka went into labor on a warm spring evening, exactly 9 months after that night when she and Preston had first truly become husband and wife. Preston sent for the midwife, a capable woman named Anne who had delivered half the babies in Millbrook. The labor was long and difficult. Urzka's strength, usually such an asset, made it harder for Anne to help her, and there were moments when Preston feared they would lose both mother and child. But Urzka was as strong in labor as she was in everything else. After nearly a full day, she finally gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Preston held his son for the first time and felt his whole world shift. The baby had green-tinted skin, lighter than Urzka's but clearly not fully human. His ears were slightly pointed, and when he yawned, Preston could see the tiny buds of what would eventually be small tusks. He is perfect, Preston whispered. He is ours, Urzka said, exhausted but radiant. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months, but looking at his son, Preston knew what felt right. What about Thomas? He suggested. after my father, and we can give him an orc name too." "You choose." "Thomas," Urzka said, testing the name. "Thomas Gruck. Gruck means strong heart in the old language." "Thomas Gruck Everett," Preston said. "I like it." The first few months of parenthood were exhausting. Thomas was a healthy baby but demanding, and both Preston and Urzka struggled with sleepless nights and the constant demands of caring for an infant while also managing the farm. But they managed, helping each other through the hard moments and celebrating the small victories. Thomas's first smile. His first laugh. The way he would grab onto Preston's finger with his tiny hand. When Preston took Thomas into town for the first time, he braced himself for negative reactions. But instead, people cooed over the baby just as they would any child. Martha insisted on giving him a hand-knitted blanket. Edith brought a rattle she said had been her own son's. "He is precious," Anne the midwife declared, "and he looks just like his mother. He is going to be a strong boy." "Just like his mother," Preston agreed, smiling at Urzka. As Thomas grew, it became clear that he had inherited the best of both his parents. He was strong for his age but also clever and curious. He had Urzka's determination and Preston's kindness. By the time he was 2 years old, he was already helping around the farm in small ways, carrying tools to his parents and helping feed the chickens. The farm continued to prosper. Preston and Urzka expanded their fields and added more livestock. They built an addition onto the house to give Thomas his own room and to make space for the possibility of more children in the future. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston woke early and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Urzka. He went outside and picked wildflowers from the meadow beyond their fields, the same meadow where he had picked flowers for her during their first summer together. When he returned, Urzka was awake, sitting up in bed with Thomas nestled beside her, the two of them reading a picture book together. "Happy anniversary," Preston said, presenting her with the flowers. "Happy anniversary," Urzka said, her smile bright. "I cannot believe it has been 5 years." "I can," Preston said, climbing back into bed beside his family. "It feels like you have always been here." "In some ways I have," Urzka said. "I did not truly start living until I came to this farm. Everything before was just existing." "I know what you mean," Preston said. "I was so lonely before you came. I did not even realize how lonely until I had you here to contrast it with." They spent the day together as a family, taking a rare break from farm work. They packed a picnic and took Thomas to the creek, where he splashed in the shallow water and laughed with delight. They told him stories about how they had met, about the day Urzka had arrived at the station and Preston had been so shocked by her size. "I thought she was going to break my plow just by looking at it," Preston joked. "And I thought you were going to send me back on the next train," Urzka added. "But you did not," Thomas said seriously. He was a solemn child, thoughtful beyond his years. "You stayed together." "We did," Preston confirmed, "and I am so glad we did." That evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, Preston and Urzka sat outside watching the stars, just as they had done that night when they had first confessed their feelings for each other. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked quietly. "Leaving your clan, coming here, marrying a human?" "Never," Urzka said firmly. "I have everything I ever wanted. A home, a husband who loves me, a son who is healthy and happy. What is there to regret?" "I worry sometimes that you gave up too much," Preston admitted. "Your people, your culture." "I did not give it up," Urzka said. "I brought it with me. I teach Thomas the old songs. I tell him stories of the orc clans. I cook the foods I learned as a girl. My culture is part of who I am, and I am sharing it with both of you. But I am also learning new things. Human customs, farming techniques, reading and writing. I am more now than I could have been if I had stayed with the clans. "You are incredible," Preston said, not for the first time. "We are incredible," Urzka corrected. "Together." She was right, Preston thought. Separately, they had both been struggling, he with his failing farm and loneliness, she with the suffocating restrictions of clan life. But together they had built something wonderful. A farm that thrived, a son who was loved, a marriage that grew stronger every year. It had not been easy. They had faced prejudice, doubt, and their own fears. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their son. Thomas grew tall and strong, eventually surpassing his father in height by the time he was 12. He had his mother's strength and work ethic, but he also had his father's patience and kindness. The farm expanded until it was one of the most productive in the area. Preston and Urzka hired help during harvest season, providing jobs for several young people from Millbrook. They became respected members of the community, their unusual marriage no longer a source of scandal, but simply a fact of life. Other mixed marriages followed theirs. A human woman married an orc man who worked at the lumber camp. A merchant's son fell in love with an orc woman he met at a trade fair. Each time, Preston and Urzka served as examples that such marriages could work, could thrive. On their 10th anniversary, the town threw them a celebration. It was held in the town square, and it seemed like everyone in Millbrook turned out for it. There was food and music, and people made speeches about how Preston and Urzka had changed the town for the better. 10 years ago, I would not have believed an orc could be a valued member of our community, Sheriff Donnelly said in his speech. But Urzka has proven me wrong in every way. She is a model citizen, a devoted mother, and a hard worker. We are lucky to have her and her family here. Richard, Preston's former antagonist, stood and raised his glass. "I will admit that I was one of Urzka's biggest critics when she first arrived," he said. "I said terrible things, things I am ashamed of now, but Urzka responded to my cruelty with grace and kindness. When I needed help, she gave it without hesitation. She taught me that character matters more than race. I am proud to call her my neighbor and my friend." Preston felt tears prick his eyes as he listened. He looked at Urzka, who was also crying, and he squeezed her hand. When it was his turn to speak, Preston stood and looked out at the crowd. "When I first contacted the marriage broker, I was desperate," he said honestly. "I was lonely. My farm was failing, and I did not know how I was going to survive. I was hoping for a partner, someone to help share the burden. What I got was so much more than that. Urzka is not just my partner. She is my best friend, the love of my life, and the best mother our son could ask for. She is strong, yes, but her real strength is in her character. Her kindness, her determination, her unwavering commitment to our family. I am the luckiest man alive to be her husband." The crowd applauded, and Urzka stood to speak. "I came to Millbrook expecting nothing," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "I had been rejected by my clan, and I thought I would spend the rest of my life as an outcast, tolerated at best. But Preston gave me a home. This community gave me a chance. And together we built something I never dreamed possible. I am not just Preston's wife or Thomas's mother. I am Urzka Everett, farmer, baker, and citizen of Millbrook. Thank you for accepting me. Thank you for accepting us." The applause was thunderous, and people crowded around to congratulate them and share their own stories of how Preston and Urzka had helped them over the years. As the celebration wound down and the stars came out, Preston and Urzka walked home hand in hand, Thomas running ahead of them, still full of energy despite the late hour. "Can you believe how far we have come?" Urzka asked, looking up at the stars. "Sometimes I still cannot believe you are real," Preston admitted. "That this life is real. It is so much better than anything I imagined when I sent that letter to the broker. I used to wonder what my life would have been like if I had stayed with the clans, Urzka said. If I had married an orc warrior and followed the traditional path. But I do not wonder anymore. I know without any doubt that this is where I am supposed to be, with you, with Thomas. Here. They reached the farm, and Thomas ran ahead to the house, eager to tell his favorite stuffed toy all about the celebration. Preston and Urzka paused at the gate, looking at their home in the moonlight. The house had expanded over the years, with additions and improvements that spoke of prosperity and care. The barn was solid and well-maintained. The field stretched out beyond, ready for another season of planting. Everything they could see was the result of their hard work, their partnership, their love. I expected a slender orc bride who could help with household tasks, Preston said softly, echoing the thoughts he had had that first day at the station. But I got a woman who could carry my plow alone, who could lift stones no man could lift, who was strong enough to face down prejudice and hate with grace and dignity. I got so much more than I expected, and I am grateful every single day. And I expected a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience that would give me a roof over my head and a purpose, Urzka replied. But I got a man who loves me for who I am, who stands beside me no matter what, who gave me a family and a home. I got love, Preston. Real, true love. And that is worth more than anything. They kissed under the stars, and then walked together into their home, ready for whatever the future might bring. Because they had learned, over these 10 years, that they could face anything as long as they faced it together. Inside, Thomas was already asleep on the couch, worn out from the excitement of the day. Preston carried him to bed while Urzka banked the fire and tidied up. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of long partnership, each knowing what the other needed without having to ask. Later, lying in bed with Urzka's head on his shoulder, Preston thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that moment of shock at the train station to this moment of perfect contentment, it had been a path filled with challenges and triumphs, fears and joys. He thought about the marriage broker's letter that had promised a slender orc bride with a gentle disposition. He had to laugh at how wrong that description had been, and how right everything had turned out anyway. "What are you thinking about?" Urzka murmured sleepily. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Preston said, "how perfect this all is." "It is not perfect," Urzka corrected gently. "But it is ours, and that makes it perfect enough." She was right, as she so often was. Their life was not perfect. The farm still required constant work. Money was sometimes tight. The prejudice they faced had lessened but not disappeared entirely. Thomas would grow up having to navigate two worlds, never fully belonging to either one. But it was their life, built on love and trust and hard work. And that made it perfect in all the ways that mattered. Years later, when Thomas was grown and had started his own family, marrying a lovely human woman, who did not care that he was half-orc, Preston and Urzka would sit on their porch and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. They would be older then, gray-haired and slower, but their love would be as strong as ever. "You remember the day we met?" Urzka would ask, as she often did. "How could I forget?" Preston would reply, as he always did. "I thought you were going to break everything you touched. And I thought you were going to send me away. Best decision I ever made was asking you to stay. Best decision I ever made was saying yes, but that was still to come." For now, on this anniversary night, they were simply a man and a woman who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together despite everything that had tried to keep them apart. Preston held Urzka close and let himself drift off to sleep, grateful for every moment that had led him to this one. He had gone to that train station expecting one thing and had received something far better. He had expected a convenient arrangement and had found true love. He had expected a helper and had found a partner. He had expected a bride and he had found a wife. His wife. His love. His Urzka. And as he fell asleep with her warm weight beside him, Preston knew that no matter what challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. Just as they always had. Just as they always would, because that was what marriage meant. Not perfection, but partnership. Not ease, but effort. Not just love, but the choice to love every single day, no matter what. And Preston Everett chose Urzka. Today, tomorrow, and for all the years to come. In the end, that was all that mattered. That they had chosen each other and that they kept choosing each other through every season, every challenge, every joy and sorrow. The woman who had arrived at the station that day could indeed carry his plow alone. But she had never had to, because they carried everything together. And that was how they had built not just a successful farm, but a successful life. Together. Always together. And they lived happily, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the love of their family, for all the rest of their days.